Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of Road to VIS 2021. Today I'm Audrey, the Director of Operation at Island Innovation, and I'm really happy to have with me today two amazing women, Rachel and Nicole, Regional Director at OXFAM Pacific. OXFAM is a global movement of people who are fighting inequality to end poverty and injustice. And we have as well Sandra, who is the CEO of Emerging Impact. And Emerging Impact is a blockchain for social impact companies that empowers social entrepreneurs and international aid agencies to develop and deploy blockchain-based fintech products. And thanks to these two organizations, we are hosting a roundtable next Thursday during the Virtual Summit on blockchain. This roundtable is named Born in the Pacific, Blockchain Evidence with Global Relevance. And the idea is to understand this Pacific model. The Pacific model is actually the host and only largest locally grown led blockchain region, and we would love to know about them and understand how does it work. That's why we are hosting this roundtable. And so ladies, can you tell us what will be the agenda? Why are we doing this? A few words on what is happening next Thursday.
Sure. Hi, Audrey. Hi again, Sandra, and hi to our listeners who are tuning in this morning. I'm tuning in from Fiji. Really happy to be here to talk about the Island Innovation Summit, just about that space and why we see it as a critical space to amplify the work that Pacific Islanders have put forward a grassroots solution, but coupled with technology. I think this is one of the things that really excites me about the space, is around how it's a global space, it's held virtually, but you're able to listen to those who are doing it every day, yeah? So the panel, when we say Born in the Pacific, local solutions, global relevance, it's around this idea that everybody, anybody, it's not just decision makers, those are in governments, those who are in academia who can create change. It can be done at community level. And this is what OXFAM does. Now, we've been working in the area of social justice and human rights for around 80 years. And what we've perfected in that time, and I can say that, is we listen. We say we do convening, brokering, facilitation, but it creates that listening bridge. So, next week, that's what the panel is going to do. It's going to demonstrate a ways of working when you're looking at climate change. I mean, you can write a lot of reports. The IPCC report has come out, and again, we've told speed up, cut those global emissions, but the how. And the how is design local solutions. That's one how, bringing people together who are doing that. And this is where I'm going to hand over to Sandra, because, in that space we're going to have time to actually listen to those who are doing it. So Sandra, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. So as the moderator of the panel, for me, one of the things that I'd like to highlight here is the fact that as this, fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, blockchain infrastructure begins to develop and expand globally, what we're seeing is that, there is more diversity in the technology space than there has ever been historically, but also as the technology moves into new geographic areas of the world that are extremely unique, sometimes very remote, like the Pacific Islands, what we're seeing is that people, communities, organizations, governments, and startups that are based in the region are reinterpreting the technology in new and different ways that really are a meeting place between what the technology can do, the context, and the culture of the people who are participating in the innovations, iteration, and creation process. And what is really fascinating, and we see this also with the Caribbean, is that in the Pacific, in these geographically distributed, regions where by their nature, culture is very decentralized, tradition is very decentralized, but community is a very tight knit concept. And we're seeing new models, of how the technology is used. OXFAM's Unblocked Cash project, being one that are significantly different from the type of solutions in the way, in their shape, form, design that are coming out of the global North and the Western world. And I think it's an opportunity to really showcase how, through an example like the Unblocked Cash project and the other organizations we'll be talking to from around the Pacific, people and communities and countries can be empowered to kind of remake the technology in their own image. And that ultimately that level of diversity in the innovation and development process is what will create a future that hopefully is more inclusive when it comes to the use of the technology. But in order for that to happen, we need to listen and acknowledge the roles of communities and this diversity of countries and stakeholders in that iteration and development process, because ultimately the shift in dialogue and the shift in power and even the decentralization of power through the use of the technology is what is really inspiring.
This is that's great, and I wanted to know, Sandra, because we will talk about the Unblocked Cash project from OXFAM. Can you tell us a bit more about that project and the link with the local communities? So what kind of communities are we also talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I used to work at OXFAM very closely with Raijeli and team. And now with Emerging Impact, I'm working adjacent to OXFAM as a partner. But, the Unblocked Cash project, when I did design and create it, was initially an attempt to break the box of humanitarian models for delivering assistance globally that were just not working in the Pacific region. Why? Because they were depending on a humanitarian infrastructure that is built for the mainland, not built for the islands, a power structure that was very centralized instead of being decentralized, and that was relying on legacy systems, notably in financial services and banking, that were never set up to sustainably, or even practically be able to reach people who are living on a multitude of islands, thousands of kilometers spread across the ocean, even if that's a single country. And so in the country of Vanuatu, what we decided to do was use kind of the decentralized power of the infrastructure of blockchain to create a humanitarian cash distribution, digital cash distribution platform that could build a digital last mile that could reach out into these communities in a way that would empower them to help each other recover through a network of local businesses and vendors selling to local people and communities affected by natural disasters. So Vanuatu is a really interesting microcosm of the Pacific, being one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, where climate change, earthquakes, volcanoes, Category 5 cyclones, and of course the impacts of COVID have been significant. And what is really fascinating about Unblocked Cash is that the entire system was designed with communities, with our local partners and staff, and between 2018 and now has grown to include coverage across 13 islands, covering more than 1,500 kilometers in Vanuatu. It has expanded to include a network of over 350 local businesses, including banana boats, mothers in the mamas in the market selling goods, taxi drivers, pharmacies, grocery stores, who are all actively assisting using kind of this Pacific culture of reciprocity and community, all of the people in the communities that have been impacted by a Category 5 cyclone in the north, a volcano in the south, and the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19 in the middle of the country. And this has proven not only the concept that the technology can be adapted to the complexity of these places, but that it can be replicated. You know, so the OXFAM team in Vanuatu has trained and done a pilot in Papua New Guinea. There is now work expanding out to places like Malawi and Zimbabwe on unblocked cash, and soon to be Solomon Islands next year, for example. So it's an excellent kind of example of how when you build from the bottom up, you start to get a solution that people see their own purpose and identity in. And that is one of kind of the I would say the qualitative aspects that are required for technology to scale practically.
Audrey, if I can come in here and to add to what Sandra has talked about, it's around the notion of accountability, right? That's behind you use the technology to be accountable, and the accountability, and this is what this blockchain has done, is that it's about the citizen, right? Driving the solution, designing, this unblocked cash project. That technology, it's written by the communities who are directly affected. So when you see what you can spend your cash voucher on, it's designed by the women that said, we want it for education, we want it for transport, we want it for health, we want it for housing implements after a cyclone. So they have designed the basket, the tool itself. We want to be able to use it on the bus, use it with the taxi drivers, use what Sandra is saying. That's designed by the women themselves, the women who were displaced by a volcano. There was about, what, was it 13,000 people who were displaced in the Umbai volcano, Sandra?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there are, I think, a couple thousand that have been affected by another volcano in the south of the country. So you see innovation that's really born from adversity, struggle, and difficulty, that when you give that a voice, and when you give people a choice, and you are able to translate the technology in a way that people can interpret and interpolate and use for their own purposes, then you start to see kind of this really fascinating leapfrogging growth. And I think, Rajali, that's what you're referring to.
Yes. And for me, the accountability, because the blockchain allows for real-time transparency, you can see where money is being spent. Because usually, in terms of when Sandra was talking about humanitarian, it's built for an old system, it's always coming down the line, and we are always having to be accountable upwards. There's always this sense that you are not using the resources in the right place. This allows us to, one, as communities, we're holding each other accountable, but also saying to those who provided the support, to say, I'm telling you, this is my accountability back to you. At the same way, I'd like to see some accountability back to us. And this is where on the panel next week, you will have our climate finance advisor who will talk about how, about what is it, 5 years ago, back in 2015, the Pacific leaders were advocating for access to climate finance. Now the resources have flowed in, but have they gotten to where they're supposed to get to? Right? That's the critical element. It's no longer just access. It's about effectiveness of the use of that resource. And then the effectiveness is determined by who? Not the reports that are written by bureaucrats or written by INGOs. The accountability is driven by the community, the users themselves. And this is, so on the panel, you'll have, so apart from the unblocked cash, that's one that we'll showcase the full cycle, but we've got access to climate finance. We've also got traceables. This is the use of blockchain technology in terms of looking at our tuna in the Pacific. It's our largest resource that we have, but how is that resource, in terms of how is it being used, the income from it, is it being put into development projects that makes a difference for Pacific Islanders, difference in the sense that it improves our livelihoods, the way it improves our economic livelihoods, development, access to water, access to affordable healthcare, is that resource being channeled back? And that's what blockchain technology enables. You know, as long as the technology is not being dumped on the Pacific, what we've been demonstrating is that we're engaging in it. You know, our youth sector, they desire that kind of interaction. So the work that OXFAM does is listen and then unpack where the power, the gatekeepers sit. So the Virtual Islands Summit is another space where islands, where the populations might be small, is small. The Pacific is known for don't work there because the economies of scale, you know, it's not profitable to work in a country where it's only 10,000 people, and yet to set up that, you know, whatever it is you're taking to that country is going to cost a lot more, your returns is low. Our approach as OXFAM is to bring a human rights perspective, is to say, are you telling us that a nation, an independent sovereign country of 10,000 people, our rights is not as important as a country with 100 million? And this is what OXFAM does. So the Virtual Islands Summit, Innovation Summit, is about addressing the power imbalance that exists, and we are able to unpack and talk, critique, but more importantly is we put solutions forward because they are values-based, they're values-driven about people. And that's, you know, this is what makes me really happy that we've got this space that allows for different types of stakeholders to come in and to be part of.
This is very inspiring because from what I understand, this is almost revolutioning the organization of organizations actually. And as you mentioned, this transparency between, well, those who are implementing and those who are impacting from those actions. And I guess, you know, who for you, who should know about those solutions? Who should be there, you know, at that roundtable? We talked about humanitarian organization, but where this model can be replicated?
Sure, I can answer that. You know, I think what we're seeing is with this type of development, you know, of the technology, you are getting more complexity in the applications themselves, but also you are stress testing the infrastructure itself. And as a result, the infrastructure and the applications built on it in complex environments like the Pacific is becoming more robust as a result. And so that's why I would say that, you know, blockchain developers and countries that are interested in frontier and emerging markets should be attending this panel to really draw these lessons, not just from OXFAM, but from the Fijian government who will be on the panel, you know, other countries, local startups. We have also hopefully the government of Vanuatu and PNG that will be on the panel, beginning to understand how these complexities have been addressed through the building and development of the technology would be interesting for the blockchain developer community. I also think that government policymakers that have, you know, are just hearing blockchain this, blockchain that, but who may be cautious, you know, because it's a big burden on your shoulder as a policymaker, of engaging with the technology because it seems too complicated or because they see too much hype and not enough practical applications of the technology. And that's why we're talking about, you know, this idea of blockchain evidence with global relevance, that this is based on the experience of practice and practitioners on the panel. And I really hope that that can begin to inspire governments across the region or even elsewhere that feel like they may be in a particularly complex, cut off, remote, or forgotten context that may need digital solutions to do what bricks and mortar solutions have failed to do in their country from an economic development perspective. And of course, humanitarian and development organizations, but even civil society organizations, you know, those who really characterize the organizations across OXFAM's network, can begin to see a role for themselves in the conversations on this panel, to really break the impression that with this new technology, it is necessarily and always something that was developed by the West, and like Rajeli was saying, has been dumped or imposed on the Pacific. This is a panel that is about taking the narrative back, taking the power back, and making sure that the technology is sitting in the right hands, you know, of people who are here in the region, of people who are people of color, of colonized nations, you know, and of countries that maybe are not the first to make the media or to be on the global stage. And so I would say anybody that that narrative resonates with can really be on this panel, because there's, what we're showcasing is that there's a role for everyone everywhere. If you take the extra effort to listen, translate the technology, and begin to develop it according to your own needs, the sky is the limit.
Yeah. If I could add to those to attend, I think students, you know, local government, but students in particular, because it is your world, right?
Yeah.
Youth, it is your world that's coming up. And what has inspired me to look for solutions and to be driven by solutions is around the way in which that I have, you know, I've returned to Fiji 8 years ago after being away for 12 years. And one of the areas that significantly, you know, made a difference to why I've stayed longer this time around is around just hanging out with my nieces and nephews and my younger cousins, is the way in which the desire, you know, the desire to make a difference, the desire to contribute, and that those of us who've had the privilege of being exposed, you know, for us, we've been independent for 50 years. What is that world that lives in that's ahead of us for another 50 years? And given with 2030, if we listen to the IPCC report, we've got to curb that global emissions to below 1.5, then engaging with students and saying, you can do this. You don't have to go through the linear system, but it's about ensuring that your voice is heard, that it's done in an accountable way, that it's transparent, that it's done in dialogue. You know, and that's what this particular panel does, is that it says, I matter, your view matter, your worldview matters, and that what you have is already a strong space. OXFAM in the Pacific, it's an international NGO, but it's led by Pacific Islanders. We are firmly rooted in the Pacific, but our vision is global. You know, our vision, and you know, it's about contributing to global solutions. And if there's someone who can speak about why it's important for us to come together, it's embedded in our value system around custodianship, stewardship. We know as Pacific Islanders, this resource is not ours to own. We hold it in custodianship. And these values are embedded in the way that we work. You know, this Unblocked Cash project carries Pacific values. We never developed it for ourselves. It's out there to inspire. It's out there to, you know, it's out there to bring people together, the possibility of maybe, but, you know, it's around the notion of citizenship, that everyone has a role to play. So, you know, students, you're listening in, youth, please come to the session. You'll see, you know, amazing people. You want to reach out to them. It's on this amazing platform, Remo, which allows us to be able to reach out and speak to people on the panel. So that's what's really nice about this space. So please sign up for not only for the summit, for our panel, but there are other exciting panels also being held. So it's a community of practice that are coming together about challenging a different way, proposing. I think it's not just challenging, it is propositional about a different way of turning up and a different way of being.
That's why, you know, when I listen to you, Rajeli, I feel there's so much meaning for us to be together today, because it's not only about, you know, having a panel, but it's also about sharing like a value system, a mindset, and really thank you for these words, because I guess that's what we need to continue to innovate and find solution from islanders as well, for islanders, because you are in the field, and so you know the challenges, and I guess you can speak to this audience because they are in those islands. What is the future, for islands? And so really thank you again for joining us at the Rich Island Summit, and even today for this amazing live. We'll end very soon. Any short words you would like to finish on, and give a last wonderful note to the audience?
I mean, I would say come join the panel. You might be surprised, but I guarantee you will see a piece of yourself reflected in the discussion that happens there.
Absolutely. I want to amplify that. You will see yourself on the stage, and you will also have the opportunity to meet them and to engage with them. We will ensure that we create that space so that, we hear from you. So please come, Naka.
Thank you so much. So everyone register on the website. You can have access to the roundtable through the agenda. It's next Thursday, and the Virtual Island Summit starts on Monday. So you'll have roundtables, public panels, interviews, and networking session. It's going to be a very exciting event. So we'll wait for you. And thank you again, Sandra. Thank you again, Rejeli. And we see you next week.
See you next week. Naka.
Thanks, Audrey.